first thing Amara did when she got the call was drop her phone. It hit the break room floor with a crack loud enough to make two colleagues look up from their lunches, and then look away just as quickly when they saw it was her. That was the thing about Hartwell and Associates. If the crisis didn't belong to you, neither did the eye contact. She snatched it back up, hands moving faster than her brain. The screen had spiderwebbed at the corner, which meant one more thing she couldn't afford to fix. But the screen didn't matter. What the school had just told her mattered. Her 8-year-old son, Kofi, had fallen during recess. Possible fracture. They needed her there now. Amara looked at the clock on the break room wall. 2:43. She had a client presentation at 3. She walked out past the rows of glass-walled offices where directors sat behind clean desks doing very important things and went straight to her supervisor's door. Patricia Vance didn't look up when Amara knocked. "My son had an accident at school," Amara said. "I need to leave." Patricia looked up slowly, glasses at the end of her nose, performing the particular expression of someone deciding whether your emergency met their threshold for inconvenience. "The Delgado presentation is in 17 minutes. I know. You built those slides. I know that too." Amara kept her voice even. She was very good at keeping her voice even. "Marcus knows the material. I'll send him the deck right now." Patricia's expression did something complicated that didn't quite resolve into sympathy. "If you walk out that door, Amara, we'll be having a conversation about commitment levels." Amara picked up her bag. "My son may have a broken arm." She walked out. The thing about Hartwell was that it had taken her 4 years to get here. 4 years of evening courses after Kofi was asleep. 4 years of applications that went nowhere. 4 years of showing up to interviews in a blazer she'd steamed the night before because she couldn't afford to dry clean it. When she finally got the junior analyst position, her mother had cried on the phone from Accra. Her mother, who did not cry about anything, had cried. Now she was walking past the security desk toward the elevator, already feeling the architecture of what was coming, the write-up, the quiet escalation, the process she had watched consume 2 other people in her department. She knew how it started. She had watched it start before. The elevator doors opened. She stepped into the lobby, and that was when she noticed the man with the mop. He was working the far end of the marble floor, unhurried but purposeful in gray coveralls with a maintenance badge clipped to his chest. He was Korean, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of face that looked like it thought about things. He glanced up when she came through, and something in his expression shifted just slightly, like he was adjusting his read on a situation. "You all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question that it stopped her completely. Nobody in this building asked if you were all right. They asked if the report was finished and had you confirmed the 3 o'clock and did you see the VP's email. "My son got hurt," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I have to get to him." Man nodded just once, like this was enough information. "Go," he said. "He needs his mother." She got in the elevator. The doors closed. She pressed the lobby button and told herself she was absolutely not going to cry in a corporate elevator, because that was a humiliation she could not come back from. She mostly succeeded. Kofi had not broken his arm. He had sprained his wrist, which he wore like a trophy for the next 2 weeks and described to anyone who would listen as the result of an attempted flip. He had not been attempting a flip. He had slipped on wet grass chasing a football, but Amara let him have the flip. He was 8, and the world had time to correct him later. The conversation with Patricia happened the next morning. It was exactly as Amara had predicted, HR-appropriate language wrapped around a very clear message. A formal note in her file. Future absences of this nature, without proper advance notice, would constitute a performance concern. Patricia used the word professionalism 4 times in 11 minutes, which Amara counted because counting gave her something to do with her face. She went back to her desk. She did her work. At lunch she ate jollof rice from a container she'd packed at 6 in the morning, scrolled through her bank account, and closed the app because looking at numbers didn't change them. The man from the lobby was on the 4th floor the next day, running a buffer along the corridor near the coffee machine. She didn't know why she noticed him specifically. There were several maintenance workers in the building, and she'd never paid them particular attention before. Maybe it was because he was the only person in this building who had asked if she was all right in longer than she could remember. "How's your son?" he said when she stopped to get coffee. She paused. "You remembered that? Sprained or broken?" "Sprained. He's telling people it was a flip." "It absolutely not." Man's mouth curved into a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and seemed slightly surprised at itself. "Good kid," he said, covering for his own clumsiness. "That's future leadership material right there." Amara laughed before she could stop herself, louder than was appropriate for a Tuesday morning in a corporate corridor, and clapped a hand over her mouth. His smile got wider. "I'm Amara," she said. "Jae-won," he said. "But most people here just say Jae." They stood in the slightly awkward way of two people who have had a real exchange in a place that doesn't really permit those. Then Amara got her coffee and went back to her desk, and thought about the conversation for the rest of the afternoon, which was inconvenient because she had a great deal of work to do. He was there most days after that. Fourth floor usually, sometimes the lobby. She noticed he moved like someone who had somewhere to be but wasn't performing urgency about it, which was unusual in a building full of people who performed urgency as a professional sport. They talked in small installments, 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there. She learned he had a younger sister he spoke about with quiet protectiveness. He learned about Kofi's dinosaur obsession and his unshakable certainty that he would one day own one. Jae-won said he respected the conviction. "You ever think about doing something else?" she asked one afternoon, and then immediately felt the question land wrong because it implied there was something lacking in what he currently did. But he tilted his head with an expression that was almost amused. "What would you suggest?" "I don't know, you just seem observant, thoughtful. Janitors can't be thoughtful, that's not what I meant." "I know." He said, "I'm messing with you." Patricia's situation came out over several conversations, in the way that real things come out not all at once, but in pieces when the moment felt right. He listened without immediately trying to fix it or one-up it with his own story, which was rarer than it should have been. She said commitment levels, Amara told him one afternoon, still freshly irritated. "As though leaving to collect my possibly injured child is a demonstration of insufficient dedication to spreadsheets." "What did you say back?" "Nothing. I picked up my bag and left." He was quiet for a moment. "Good answer," he said. "Really? Sometimes the best response is silence, makes them hear themselves." She turned that over for a long time afterward. Meanwhile, the slow erosion at work continued. A project she had led for 4 months was quietly reassigned to a colleague named Derek, who had been at the company for 10 months and had once referred to compound interest as that thing where money gets extra money. The reassignment was delivered as a compliment. Derek needs the development opportunity, and Amara sat through the explanation and nodded and went home and sat at her kitchen table after Kofi was in bed and stared at the wall and tried to figure out if she was imagining a pattern. She wasn't imagining it. She knew she wasn't imagining it. "What would happen?" she asked Jae-won the following week. "If I went above Patricia?" He leaned on the mop handle. "What do you want to happen?" "I want someone to look at what I've actually produced, not how I perform enthusiasm, not whether I smile the right amount in meetings, just the work, whether it's good." "It good?" "Yes," she said, with more conviction than she had planned to use. "Then go above her," he said, "but bring the work with you." She spent 2 evenings compiling everything. Every project, every outcome, every client note, every number she could trace back to something she had personally built. It was thorough. It was, she privately admitted to herself, impressive, and she was tired of being uncomfortable admitting that. She sent it to the regional director, a man named Harlan she had met twice at company events, who seemed unlike Patricia to have a genuine interest in what people produced. His response came back in 4 hours. He wanted to schedule a meeting. She almost sent the message to Jae-won before remembering she didn't have his contact details because he was the maintenance worker and she didn't even know his surname. She told him in person instead the next morning, and his reaction was quiet satisfaction, not performed, not excessive, just real. He said, "The meeting hasn't happened yet. You did the right thing." She looked at him then properly, the way she had been carefully avoiding. He was, she noticed, with some annoyance at herself, quite good-looking in a completely unintentional way. His hands, resting on the mop handle, were unblemished in a way that didn't quite match the work. He stood with a stillness that didn't come from passivity. It came from someone who was used to being in rooms without needing to announce themselves. She filed these observations away under, not relevant. The meeting with Harlan lasted 40 minutes. Real questions, the kind that required real answers. At the end of it, he recommended her for a senior analyst position that had just opened, bypassing the usual process. She walked out of his office and straight into the fourth-floor corridor looking for Jae-won, and he wasn't there, which felt deeply unfair given the circumstances. She found him an hour later by the service elevator. She told him. He smiled, that real, slightly surprised at itself smile. "You earned it," he said. "You told me to bring the work." "You already knew to bring the work, I just said it out loud." She made the decision she had been arguing herself out of for several weeks. "Do you want to get coffee sometime? Actual coffee. Not," she gestured at the machine down the corridor, "whatever that machine is producing, which I believe is hot water that once heard coffee described." He went still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. Something moved across his face, complicated, briefly conflicted. "Amara, just coffee," she said. "Two people who have been talking in corridors for 2 months, sitting down somewhere with actual chairs," he said after a moment. "I'd like that." They went on a Saturday to a spot in her neighborhood where the owner, a warm Ghanaian woman named Auntie Efua, who ran the place like a family living room, knew Amara's order before she gave it and always slipped Kofi a small bun whenever he came in, whether Amara had asked or not. Amara had arranged for her neighbor to watch Kofi. She told herself this was not a significant event, while doing all the things a person does when something is significant. Jae-won arrived on time, out of the coveralls, in a plain dark sweater, and looked faintly disoriented without anything to lean on. "You look lost," she told him. "I'm very good with mops," he said. "Tables are unfamiliar territory." Efua brought them both water, looked at Jae-won with the unhurried assessment of a woman who had raised 4 children and held correct opinions about people within 90 seconds of meeting them, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Amara took this as a favorable sign. They talked for 3 hours. She told him things she hadn't told anyone in a while, about the years after Kofi's father left, about the period when she had genuinely been afraid of how things were going to land, about her mother in Accra who called every Sunday and asked first about Kofi and second about whether Amara was eating real food and not that office nonsense. He laughed at that. She liked the sound of it. When he talked about his own life, he was careful in a way she noticed. He spoke about people who depended on him, about the weight of decisions, about a mistake he'd made years ago that had cost someone their livelihood. He said it quietly, with the kind of guilt that doesn't perform itself. "Do you still think about it?" she asked. "Every time a decision comes up that affects someone who doesn't know I'm making it," he said. She sat with that. "That's a specific kind of guilt." "It is," he said. She went home with the particular unsettled feeling that means something has mattered. Kofi looked at her face when she walked through the door and said, with the devastating perception of small children, "You look weird, Mama." "Thank you," she said. "Eat your rice." The following Monday morning, the lobby of Hartwell and Associates contained a controlled commotion, sharper suits than usual, assistants moving with the clipped purpose of people who'd been told to look capable. Her colleague Desiree, who functioned as the building's most efficient intelligence network, materialized at Amara's side within 40 seconds of her clearing the security desk. "Reynolds Capital is doing a site visit," Desiree said, in the tone of someone delivering classified information. "The CEO is here personally, like in the building right now." Amara shifted her bag. "Since when?" "Since this morning. Apparently he does this thing where he goes undercover at their acquisitions, spends a few weeks just watching, seeing how things actually run." Desiree paused for effect. "Nobody knows which company he'll show up at or when." Amara got in the elevator and pressed 4 and thought about her 9 o'clock prep notes. She stepped out, walked toward her desk, past the corridor by the service elevator. Jae-won wasn't there. She noticed this, told herself to stop noticing it, and sat down. The CEO arrived on the fourth floor at 11:15. Amara knew because the commotion migrated upstairs, and Patricia emerged from her office wearing an expression that had never appeared during any of their one-on-ones. A stretched, effortful brightness, the face of a person who has suddenly remembered that people above her in the hierarchy exist and form opinions. Amara was mid-call when she heard the voice. She knew the voice. She turned in her chair. Jae-won, her Jae-won, mop handle Jae-won, 3 hours of real conversation. Jae-won was standing at the entrance to the fourth floor in a suit that cost more than 2 months of Amara's salary, with 3 people flanking him while Patricia shook his hand with both of hers and said, in a register Amara had never once heard her use. Mr. Kwon, what an absolute honor. Kwon Jae-won. Reynolds Capital. Jae-won Kwon. Amara turned back to her screen. Her call was still going. Someone was talking about Q3 projections. She responded correctly because she was a professional and because she needed approximately 60 additional seconds before she could trust what her face was doing. She ended the call. She sat very still. Desiree appeared. That's Kwon Jae-won. He's like 36, built Reynolds Capital from basically nothing after leaving his family's company in Seoul. Forbes did a piece on him last year. Desiree looked at Amara. Apparently he spent 3 weeks here as a maintenance worker. Wild, right? Wild, Amara said, in a voice calibrated to reveal absolutely nothing. She did not speak to him that day. He was in meetings from 11 until close, and then he was gone, and she drove to pick up Kofi and made egusi soup because cooking helped her think, and sat at the kitchen table after Kofi was asleep, and tried to sort through what she felt into something manageable. There were 2 feelings. They were not cooperating with each other. The first was hurt, not dramatic, not theatrical, but the quiet, specific kind that comes from realizing someone you trusted wasn't giving you the complete picture while you were giving them yours. She had told him about the scared years, about Kofi's father, about her mother crying when she got the job. She had told him real things in real time, and he had been, what? Conducting an assessment. She didn't know where she fit in that story, and she didn't like not knowing. The second feeling, which she was less comfortable with, was that the conversations had been real. Whatever his reason for being there, she had not imagined the quality of his attention. 3 hours at Auntie Efua's place had not been a performance. You couldn't fake that kind of listening. She had been listening closely her entire life, and she knew the difference. She was still angry. He called the next morning from an unsaved number. Her phone auto-filled the name from some public database, Kwon Jae-won, and she looked at it for a long moment before answering. Before you say anything, he said. You called me, she said. I'm not saying anything. A pause. Fair point. Are you calling? Because I owe you an explanation, and I thought calling was better than ambushing you at work, given that I apparently own the work. Apparently on the work undid her slightly, the self-awareness in it. She exhaled. You could have told me, she said. I know. There were many opportunities. We had a lot of conversations, Jae-won. I know that too. So why didn't you? He was quiet. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of someone who had prepared several versions of this answer and had decided in the last second that they were all wrong. Because you talked to me like a person, not a contact, not an opportunity, not someone useful to know. You told me real things, and I kept not wanting to be the thing that changed what you were willing to tell me. That is, she said carefully, a very self-serving answer. You know it's self-serving. I do. She moved to the kitchen window. Outside, the morning was doing ordinary things, the neighbor's dog, a car revering out of a driveway, across skyline wallpaper on her phone case catching the light. Ordinary life being itself. What do you actually want, Jae-won? I want to tell you the truth about who I am, which is complicated and probably less impressive than either extreme. I want to know if you're willing to hear it. A beat. And I want to know if there's a version of this where we still get coffee, even if you spend the whole time being angry at me. I can work with angry. Kofi appeared in the kitchen doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, assessed the situation with the silent intelligence of a child who has learned when adults are having important moments, and went directly to the cereal cabinet without asking any questions. He examined his options with the gravity of a scientist. Amara watched him. 2 weeks, she said into the phone. I want 2 weeks where you visibly do not make any decisions about my career or anyone else at this company. Then we can talk. Done. I mean it. I know, done. She hung up. Kofi carried his bowl to the table, sat down, and said without looking up, "You come home different on the days you talk to the building person." Amara stared at him. "What?" He shrugged with the magnificent indifference only 8-year-olds can produce. "You just do. Your cereal," she said. The 2 weeks passed. Amara moved formally into the senior analyst role. Patricia stopped making eye contact, which Amara found deeply peaceful. Derek gave a presentation based substantially on her old project work, and she smiled politely and said nothing, because silence was still, occasionally, the best answer. She called Jae-won on day 15. "You survived the 2 weeks," she said when he answered. "It was hard. I know, I watched you not touch 4 things you were clearly considering touching. I will neither confirm nor deny that." Patricia's situation. A pause. "She's been moved to a non-management role. Different reasons, longer timeline, not connected to you, but I want to be transparent about it." Amara nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Okay," meaning okay. "Okay," meaning okay, Jae-won. "I understand that a company does not freeze because I asked you for 2 weeks. I'm reasonable." "You are extremely reasonable," he said. "It's one of the things he stopped. Finish it. Of the things I like about you," he said. "Among several others, if that's relevant." She let the silence sit for a moment. "It might be," she said. "Let's get coffee and find out." They went back to Auntie Efua's. Amara arrived first. She watched him come through the door and do the same small recalibration she'd noticed that first day in the lobby, adjusting from whatever version of himself existed out there to the version that existed here. She understood that. She realized. She had a version of herself that existed in boardrooms and a version that existed at this kitchen table at 7 in the morning watching Kofi eat cereal. The gap between them wasn't deception. It was just the ordinary complexity of being more than one thing. Auntie Efua brought them both tea without being asked, looked at Jae-won with the frank assessment she gave everyone, and said to Amara in Twi, "He has a good face, the quiet kind." Then she went back to the counter. Jae-won looked at Amara. "What did she say?" She said, "The tea is fresh." Amara said, "They stayed 4 hours." The truth about Jae-won was complicated in the way real things are, not dramatically, not with hidden scandals, but with history, with pressure, with a man who had stepped out from under the enormous weight of his family name and built something of his own, and then found himself unable to trust that anyone saw him apart from it. The undercover visits had started after a regional manager had covered up a serious HR issue, and Jae-won had found out too late. He had needed to know what was actually happening inside his own buildings. He had not expected to have a real conversation with anyone. "And then there was me," Amara said. "And then there was you," he said, "dropping your phone and being professionally furious about a presentation, choosing my son over a spreadsheet." He looked at her steadily. "In a building full of people performing their priorities, you had actual ones. You could have told me at the coffee shop," she said. "That was the obvious moment. You were telling me about the years when you were afraid," he said. "I didn't want to become the reason you stopped." She looked at him across the table. Auntie Efua was humming something behind the counter. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary Saturday things. "I'm still a little angry," she said. "I know. I'm allowed to keep being a little angry. Completely fair. If this is going to be anything," she gestured at the space between them, at the cups and the table and the 4 hours, "it cannot be something where I owe you anything. What I have needs to be because of what I built." "I know that," he said. "I watched you build it. That's not a problem for me." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not interested in a version of this where you need me for anything except the conversation. I watched you walk out of a building for your son. I watched you build a case that got you promoted over someone who had been trying to sideline you for a year. I just want to know the person who did those things." Amara sat with that for a long moment. Then she picked up her tea. "Kofi will interrogate you," she said. "He has a system. Prepare." "You cannot prepare for Kofi," he smiled. "I like a challenge." He came for Sunday dinner 3 weeks later. Kofi met him at the door holding a plastic stegosaurus and wearing the expression of a customs official. "Do you know what the stegosaurus ate?" Kofi said. Jae-won crouched to eye level without hesitation. "Plants, ferns, cycads, possibly horsetail. Some scientists think it had a beak structure for selective feeding." Kofi stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then he turned and looked at Amara with an expression that communicated, clearly and without ambiguity. This one is acceptable. Amara served jollof rice and fried plantain and a chicken stew her mother had taught her when she was 12. Kofi explained at length why the Stegosaurus was the most underrated dinosaur in the Jurassic period, and Jae-won asked follow-up questions, genuine ones, not the performed kind, and at some point Amara stood at the counter listening to the two of them and felt something settle in her chest. The particular quality of a good thing, a real thing, something that had been built without a plan, out of two people being honest in a corridor. She had not been looking for this. She had been managing a career and raising a child and navigating the distance between who she was and what the world wanted from her. She had not been waiting for anything, but here it was anyway. Unmistakable, inconvenient, and entirely worth it. She brought the plates to the table. Kofi moved the Stegosaurus to make room. Jae-won looked up at her with that real smile, the one that still looked slightly surprised at itself after all this time, and she sat down. Outside, the evening was doing its quiet thing. Inside, there was rice and plantain and a small boy who believed in dinosaurs and a man who had shown up to something real, and Amara, who had built all of it from the ground up. If this story hit close to home, you already know what to do. Smash that like button and drop a comment telling us. Did Jae-won deserve Amara's grace, or should she have made him work harder? Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We'll be here.